Wake up and you still feel the same.
Well, hello everybody. How are you guys doing this morning? You made it through the snow and all that jazz. So, welcome to the Minnesota Music Summit here at the History Theater. Thank you to the History Theater and everyone at McNally Smith for hosting this event, the keynote address. And my name is Ellen Stanley. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Music Coalition. We're the only statewide nonprofit devoted solely to supporting musicians of all genres across the state. That's what I think too. I think it's a good cause. And as a musician, I know how much help we all need. So this summit is just one of many programs we do throughout the year, bringing you skills, resources, and opportunities to have more successful careers in music. And so this weekend, we just had a great kickoff party last night at Summit Brewing, and today we'll have workshops and mentoring sessions, and the same with tomorrow right here at McNally Smith. And then in the evening, we'll have some concerts and social time at the Amsterdam Bar and Hall. And then on Sunday, we have a very cool after party happening at Third Bird in Minneapolis with the Minneapolis St. Paul Film Festival. And I know that one of the musicians providing the entertainment that night is here tonight, here today. Lynn O'Brien and Stephen Hobart will be playing some jazz, so it'll be a lot of fun. And if you didn't pick up the schedule outside on the table, pick one on your way out, so you can decide what events you can come to. Hopefully we'll see you at many of them. And feel free to bring your friends. Even if you didn't pre-register, it's okay, just come on down. And right now it's my great privilege to introduce a long-time friend of mine, and worked with him for many years when I worked at Red House Records. And he's been helping behind the scenes for many years, bringing great acoustic radio to the Twin Cities as a producer of the morning show on Minnesota Public Radio, with Dale and Jim Ed, and now the host of Radio Heartland. And if you haven't checked it out and you're a fan of acoustic music and Americana music, you definitely should check it out at radioheartland.org. You can also get there through the NPR website as well. But I'd love to introduce Mike Pangra to the stage.
Thank you, Ellen, for a nice introduction. If you have an HD radio, by the way, that's another way to get Radio Heartland. It's a digital radio that has more than one station on a certain frequency, but no one's got HD radios. So we're stuck with the internet. But anyway, I love working with Radio Heartland, and I love meeting roots and folk musicians and people like Dar Williams, John Gorka, and such. So I was thinking recently about what parts of a culture are left behind after civilization leaves. Sometimes fragments of buildings, sometimes pieces of weapons, sometimes bones, things like that. But the things that really survive and that say something about a culture are its art and music. Dar Williams thinks a lot about culture and civilization. In fact, she goes beyond the traditional role of the singer-songwriter here and you out there in the dark. She goes on and teaches future authors and songwriters about the importance of music and literature in our community. Dar has recorded 9 studio albums and a few live ones since the early 90s as a solo artist and as part of Cry, 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 an all-star trio with Lucy Kaplansky and Richard Schindel. Her latest album is called Emerald. It's going to be released in May with guest appearances from Richard Thompson, Jim Lauderdale, and Suzy and Lucy Wainwright Roach. And if that weren't enough, she also teaches high school and college students about the importance of music and its huge role in social movements of our time. She has written 2 young adult novels and lectures about the creative process in writing books and songs. And she leads discussions about building community through the importance of arts and literature, about charitable work, about women in music, about balancing your performing life and your family life, that's a big one, about touring as a green artist, about music and social justice, and about preserving the world's bee population. We're very fortunate to have such a talented and accomplished artist in our community and in our midst today. Would you please welcome Dar Williams.
Thank you so much. All right, this is, we're going to start with a little experiment. You got to humor me here. All right. we go. We're going to do this together. It's, okay, a lot of people know this, and if you don't, we can get right in on it, okay? So get in as fast as you can, and if you know it, then maybe add some harmony. Let's just see how far we can go, how fast. All right, here we go. If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out warning, I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Bell, if I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, I'd ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out danger, I'd ring out warning, I'd ring out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Song. If I had a song, I'd sing it in the morning, I'd sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing out danger, I'd sing out warning, I'd sing out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. Well, I got a hammer, and I've got a bell, and I've got a song to sing all over this land. It's the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's the song of love between brothers and sisters all over this land. It's the hammer of justice, it's the bell of freedom, it's the song of love between brothers and sisters all over this land. So, all right, and I did not help that I looked kind of like I was falling off the chair, because I kind of was. But, so let's just take that and put it in our back pockets. Okay, how did that feel? Like, a little weird at first. It's 11 in the morning, we're sort of spread out, and you're in the dark. But then, it's a good song, right? It's a very durable song. It can have a lot of applications, easy to learn, we can all kind of pick it up together. So all right, let's just keep that in our back pockets and think about that. And then we can get started. All right. And let's talk about Spotify. I'm not a fan. And I feel like a responsibility. I feel like Mike knows this, and Ellen knows this, and John Bork knows this, who's here. Something happened in the 90s. We were kind of swimming in this pool of opportunities that came because you could sell your records, and you didn't sell a ton. As our friend Utah Phillips would say, you make a living, not a killing, but you can make a living. There's mechanical royalties mean that you get 7 cents per song that you write per album. So if you sold, 10,000 albums, you made $7,000, and that was a good amount of money for the gas to get you from gig to gig, So there's a whole world with Spotify, and I wasn't sure how long this talk was going to be, so I had many examples of what's going on with streaming. And I think we can talk about that if you want, but basically there's a whole world of people out there saying there's plenty of money, you just don't know where to find it. Especially people who have nothing to do with actually playing music. When you talk to fellow musicians, they say, I don't know, I'm just doing the math. David Byrne said, help me here. Why should a person ever buy an album again if they can get whatever album they want on a $7 subscription? Whenever they want. And all these people said, David Byrne, great musician, but leave the math to us. He was right. There is that pool of money from music distribution is not there. And then there's a whole bunch of people, like some guy called, Dave's Music Blog, but I think it should be called Dave Sitting in a Lawn Chair Yelling at Us Blog, that says, just get off your butts and tour. It's about touring, man, always was, it's music. And then there's that final blow, which says, you're like, well, it's really hard to make a living. And then there's that whole like, who cares? You love what you do, so who cares if you make money? So, I just want to say, we are not in what I consider to be a sustainable music business model right now. Touring makes it somewhat sustainable. There's certain things that make it more sustainable, but the distribution end right now is not very sustainable. I'm doing pledgemusic.com for to raise money, but I have a base and I have a reputation so people can pre-order the album, and there's, it would be hard to use that as the way I was introducing myself to the world. And touring's great, but I know people, we know people who are in wheelchairs who had a hard time getting around and really needed the distribution end, and who got depressed but couldn't afford health care for their depression, and who are no longer with us. So, touring, great. Get off your asses and do that. That's lovely, but it's not for everybody. So, so that's what I'll say. I'll also say that the music business also used to rely on these things called record companies. And even before the streaming stuff happened with Pandora and Spotify, I remember walking into a Starbucks in 2005, and Hear Music used to do these compilations where they would introduce you to people on these compilations, and there was this culture of getting these compilations of people that you hadn't heard before and getting turned on to them, and there's still some of that. I was on some of them, I'm sure John was on some of them, and there were there was this whole thing in the 90s of, trust us, we're going to turn you on to this, and listen to this, and try this, and go to this festival. And I remember walking into that Starbucks in 2005, and it was all Bob Dylan, because the music business was in a tailspin. So they went from here's Matchbox 20, and we showed you 19 Matchboxes to get up to Matchbox 20, to Bob Dylan. You loved him before, you love him now. It's just all Dylan. Okay. And the cover of Billboard went, every week there was a picture of a lovely lady with long hair and big boobs on the cover of Billboard forever, from a different country that they were, so she had different hair and different boobs, but generally, she's from South America, she's from Canada, she's from Europe. Suddenly all the pictures were of sweating men with ponytails going, what happened? And so the record business that had sort of been this puppeteer, not of individuals, but of like an entire sort of city, where they would say, okay, your tour money is going to go to pay for this person's publicity. That was happening. That has disappeared a lot too. So you get a lot of monoculture, a lot of dispiriting monoculture in the major labels right now. So you get Katy Perry, who is a phenomenon as much as she's a musician. She is sponsored by Pepsi, which is another way that you can make music now, is by getting these massive endorsements. And she dressed up as a Cheeto for Halloween and said with a straight face that the reason she did that is because she loves Cheetos so much. So it's like, that's a very bought and sold culture that can be very dispiriting to us. And so, so that's so all of that is going on right now, and has the lawn chair bloggers telling us that we just ought to be more scrappy. It's different, and in my opinion, not sustainable to our ultimate goals. I applaud the scrappiness, but I think we also have to console and inform one another of that reality. So that's what I would consider to be the icy blue part of my speech, like a little lighter than this, kind of the chilly part. Then there's the magenta part, which is the fact that I did teach this course about music movements at Wesleyan. And, and I came up through what a friend of mine at Flemington Levitch, a great booking agency, said was an audience-based career. He said, you're so lucky. He said, I've never drawn up a contract for a tip jar gig in La Crosse, Wisconsin, but that's what you're doing, so that's the contract that I drew up for you are. And he said, you're coming up through the facial expressions of audiences, the kindness of poets who choose to have, you know, a music series at their cafes. You're finding out who you are through your peers and your audience. It's not like you bring a little tape up to the 50th floor of Sony, and then Sony calls Sony friend in, you know, the movie part, and Sony calls the, you know, Pepsi. You know, you're coming up through this network, and you get to really find out who you are from the world, not from what the industry tells you to do. It's not an industry-based career. So from the start, I had a really wonderful socially based career at a time when there was a very warm network of venues. And then also of a record company that took me on and said, you work hard, we'll work hard, we're growing, you're growing. Let's see how far we can grow together. And they ultimately sent my music off to commercial radio stations. They also sent posters off to small Unitarian churches. And so, thank God for them, whoever you are. That was, you know, I had that great opportunity to grow in a socially based, warm, collegial world. When I went to Wesleyan, I saw what I had experienced writ large in terms of the importance of audience-based, socially based music careers in the world and music making in the world. Because I was turned on to this phrase that Rob Rosenthal and Richard Flax, they wrote this book called Playing for Change, and they really emphasized this thing called homology. And your homology is where in your diversity you find common strains. I was turned on to this phenomenon. So it's how you smell, you know. So in the 60s, it's sandalwood and it's spot smoke and it's perspiration that smells like cheap wine, and it's fringe and it's beads and it's feathers, and it's poetry. It's the shorthand and the longhand, the identity, the street beat, and the passion that keeps people connected to each other and speaking that shorthand through the tedium and humiliation and frustration of social movements. What I discovered was that there was a strong homology at work at different times of history where we had social movements. And the social movements, for all that they went through, at the end of the day, I believe, really succeeded. And the thing is, I don't know if you've heard this, but a lot of people say, well, in the 60s, you know, the draft came along, so they had to take to the streets. In the 60s, you know, there was this war, and that's why people were making all that music that mattered. I did not experience homology that way, nor did I experience the strength of social movements that way. What I saw were a lot of grainy videotapes of people in Greenwich Village and other cities like Chicago, here in the Twin Cities, Seattle, San Francisco, but mostly, you know, Greenwich Village really was an epicenter. I would see documentaries about, you know, the gay movement and the folk movement and the anti-war movement, and they would show you these beginnings in Greenwich Village. And I thought, my gosh, everyone has a musical instrument on their back. Everybody has. And everybody's making music. In the background, there's always somebody sitting on a wall teaching somebody a chord or singing, or, you know, or singing along, you know, and the women, you know, with their hair singing along. And there's this guy named Alan Block, Rory Block's dad, actually, at Alan Block's sandal shop. He made sandals. And then there was this auxiliary room for jamming. There were old school music people there, so old-time music people there, so there was this avuncular, uncle-like presence of support for these kids learning. Bob Dylan called it the blender, because on any given night you would see blues, jazz, folk, rock in one club, so there was this incredible cross-pollination of musical styles and permission to try new things. And you had that homology of making music and sharing poetry as part of who you know, of your identity. out of that pool of creating music together came the streets, taking to the streets with this in the anti-war movement. And also trying to transform the political scene. In 1968, they tried their hand, from what I could tell, by going to the Chicago Convention and saying, Martin Luther King is dead, Robert Kennedy is dead, but we still want to transform the Democratic Party, and they got beaten up. And then they watched all of the Democrats say, we're not going to take your side on this. We're going to side with the people who beat you up. The next summer came Woodstock. And it was supposed to have, 100,000 people, and it had 500,000 people, and it was an incredible fishes and loaves story where people took care of each other all weekend. And that, from that success and that homology came something that I didn't really know about until after, which was Peter Yarrow Peter Palmieri, helped to organize a gigantic anti-war march that happened right after Woodstock, again with about 500,000 people. So, the homology of the music that they were making on that retaining wall in Washington Square Park was there. And for all of the druggy language of Woodstock, one pill makes you bigger, one pill makes you small, and one pill is, works better than the ones because mother doesn't work at all. And, sorry, go ask Alice, I don't know if you know that. Or up on Cripple Creek, she, such a drunkard's dream if I ever did see one. I don't know if you know the band song. Up on Cripple Creek, she mends me. If I spring a leak, she mends me. I don't have to speak, she defends me. A drunkard's dream, if I ever did see one. Yeah, that is a drunkard's dream, like a total enabler girlfriend. So, besides that, there was also Our House is a Minority Fine House with 2 cats in the yard. The jewels that we have are the light through the window. And, the art that we have is the flowers in the vase. Rainy Day House, Joni Mitchell singing about just lying up alone on a bed with, well, turns out Leonard Cohen. 2 teenagers kind of figuring out who they were in the world. A lot of religious language, taking back a religion for themselves. A lot of people call Peter Yarrow their rabbi. So what I learned was that there was this homology of making music together preceding the social movement, the thrust of the social movement. We also talked about the civil rights movement, where you had people making music side by side in church. And for all of the hierarchy of soloists, there was still that belief that everybody had that music to make. And a lot of that music was deep and went far back and spoke of a mountain that you go to. And the mountain that you go to in Exodus is where things aren't going to happen in this lifetime. You're doing this for your kids and for the next generation and their liberation. The civil rights movement came out of the churches and onto the street with all of that language of perseverance and solidarity. And there was violence, there was humiliation, again, there was rejection, there was, there were people ignoring them, and the music, to a person, everybody involved in the movement references the music. And then there was the homology of showing up in your Sunday best for these protests, even though you knew they were going to turn on the hoses and the dogs. It was a force. The music was a force that preceded moving into the streets, and a way of looking at each other, singing the songs that you sang in church, and knowing that that mission and that righteousness was still part of what you were doing, even though you were being humiliated and attacked. So I came to really respect and love that just phenomenon of making music together, just as everything was hitting the fan with the music world, And so I was talking to the students, and I said, so what would you do now? How would you get involved now? And they wanted to have need-blind admissions at Wesleyan, and they were going to get rid of that, which is that they were going to start paying attention to your financial status to decide whether to admit you. And the kids didn't want that, of course. The students didn't want that. And I said, so what would you do? So, could the acapella, one of the things we learned about the great homology of the street beat of music is that it's portable. So you've got to leave your electric guitars at home. But these kids have ukuleles. And these kids had voices, and these kids had drums, because it's Wesley, it's a hippie school. Of course they had drums. And, you know, so they had portability. I was like, so, Scotty, you know, lovely, tall man in an a cappella group. What about your group doing your shining star, no matter who you are, starting an a cappella and then sharing it? Because one thing I've learned is that if your music is good, your cause is strengthened. And I don't mean to be hierarchical, but, you know, if you sound good, it just works a little better. So he said, well, you know, maybe, but there's a lot of us. And I said, well, what would the downside be? What could happen? And one of the kids raised her hand. She said, well, they could lose their funding. And there was this horrible silence, especially from the woman who said it. And because we'd just been learning about the civil rights movement, about how these women who'd never been to college before were being arrested. They were on scholarship, but they'd gone to hear this young minister named Ralph Abernathy or Martin Luther King speak, and they felt like they had no choice. Young scholarship, 18-year-old girls, college, heading off to jail, in jail, hearing the men's group singing up in their cells and feeling that solidarity, singing themselves even though they were told not to sing. So that idea that the a cappella group would have its funding taken away and therefore they should feel silenced kind of hit the room like a pall, like, or just lose your funding, you know. And I said, yeah. Also, the a cappella groups raise so much money for this school. They go down, they all look good, and they go down to New York City and sing for people in blazers and raise a ton of money. So they'll never take your funding away. But it was difficult. Like you know, there was a YouTube that I had up of Sweet Honey and the Rock, and it said, let's sing along. And then like I messed up the lyrics, and I looked uncomfortable, and they looked uncomfortable, and we tried, you know. We really tried to find that way to sing side by side, even under those fluorescent lights. And finally, we just brought in the big guns. We brought in Peter Yarrow, and Peter, Paul, and Mary. And he came in, and he had this thing. And I've talked to Tom Chapin about it. I've talked to other people. There's a whole body language. There's a whole thing that they do. So he comes in, and I drove him up, you know, so we hung out. We get to the door of the classroom, and he goes, sit over there. I got this start. He picks up his guitar, and he starts going around with his guitar, and he goes, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah, and I'm like, ooh, they're not gonna sing. We have a hard time with this. They sang. And he's like, all over Wesleyan. And they're like, you know, and it was amazing. And then he, you know, puts down his guitar, he sits down, and he says, how did that feel? Did you feel, you know how I said, how does that feel? This is what he said. He's like, did you feel the vibration between your bodies? And I was like, oh. And the students were like, yeah, we felt it. And then he sits down, he's like, all right, I was just in Wisconsin. I was singing with the Solidarity Singers because they have this governor named Scott Walker. And I was like, you know, strangely, it's Wesley, but I was like, we don't really talk about politics. He's like, he's a fascist. And he gets like, and he said, here's a song. It's called Have You Been to Jail for Justice? Sing it with me now. And they sing. And I just thought, oh my gosh, so we've got to not just find ways to sing together, we've got to respect the people who know how to do that. Kim and Reggie Harris know how to do that. And, you know, certain friends of mine, Christine Lavin knows. There's just people who know. I mean, we're okay, right? We try, but but generally it's like, you know, we were the identity politics people. We would sing the songs that people would write about in their journals. So it was just a different relationship to making music. So that's kind of my, in the middle of kind of recognizing what was going on with the streaming and the streaming music and all that, and the music industry and the music businesses and the just be scrappy and get your butt out toward the world. I was also just having this profound respect for participatory music in democracy and what it does for democracy and how it allows people to be together and to stick together. I think there's a reason. How many of you have heard of COINTELPRO? It's a counterintelligence program of the CIA, and I'm sorry I didn't pull this up for you, but Janice Ian writes about it because she got access to her FBI file. Janice Ian, a folk singer and friend, and she, you know, they got in there. They would get into your friendship, they would get into your weed, they got into your bed, they got into, because they were trying to destabilize the social movement that connected the political movement that was countering the war. They got in there. They recognized the threat of making music together and how that holds things together. And I will tell you something that Peter Yarrow said. I said, you know, something I'm learning and teaching is that in social movements, you know, when you assert yourself, first thing they do is they ignore you. And you know, it took a lot of reading for me to sort of get here and being parts of social movements. But he goes, yeah, like he already knew the whole thing, you know, he goes, yeah. And I said, then they mock you. They make fun of you. He goes, yeah. And then they kill you. I said, no. They humiliate you. He goes, okay. And he goes, and I said, and he goes, and then I said, no, and then they take something away from you that's important to you, you know, your job or your reputation. And then they kill you. I said, and then they kill you. And he said, and then you win. So, so he still had the faith, and you could tell that he had the faith, and has the faith, and he has won. He's watched things die, and then he's watched, you know, he watched the humiliation of Chicago in '68, and then watched the march, and then watched the war not end, but then watched a whole generation of people who question war in a very different way going forward. And that is out there in the world. It's very important. And a whole lot of self-reflection, and a whole lot of vegetarianism, a whole lot of yoga, a whole lot of good stuff around the edges. And he holds that faith. So something that happened after teaching about the homology and encouraging the students to think about how they could repurpose. And I said, what about that song? It's not about the money. And they're like, oh, stop. Oh my gosh, it's so commercial. And I was like, yeah, but you could repurpose it and go, it's not about the money, it's about, you know, the future. So you don't look at people's financial reports before you admit them to college. And they're like, maybe. You know, so but I was constantly trying to figure out, you know, how we could find songs and repurpose them. They've all been to summer camp, you know. So that was, you know, that to me became very fascinating, how we could get back into that making music together world. But also what happened was, we taught, you know, the civil rights movement going into the music of the Black Power movement. We talked about the Greenwich Village banjoing going into the Woodstock generation. And finally, we also talked about sort of the women's music it was really the lesbian music. It wasn't really women's music. It was very much championed by lesbians who were told by white feminists, you can belong to this movement, but don't make too much noise. And by gay men, you can belong to our movement, no problem, but we don't necessarily have the same objectives. And, you know, these women, they were making a lot of music. They built these incredible stages and electrical systems and everything to have festivals. And then what they sang about at the festivals, that they were women only, they sang about their childhoods. They just went and reclaimed the childhood that no one had allowed them to have and who had humiliated them out of having. So Mae Christian sang a song about her love for the gym teacher, and another person sang a beautiful song about how she had an imaginary unicorn friend, and you know, they sang about sisterhood. But then that got into the Riot Girls, and somewhat kind of into Lilith Fair and all that stuff. Finally, somebody raised her hand and said, Professor Williams, this is so great that going to anyway, she goes, it sounds like what you're saying is that all of these movements ended up turning up the volume. And I was like, yeah, I knew that, yeah. I could have said it, but I could have crystallized it beautifully, but I was waiting for you. But she really, so that brings us back to the music industry, because I do think it's great to have music that you could march with. I was at a big event where we were going to go out and sing We Shall Overcome on stage. And I had a dress and jeans and a t-shirt, and I held up the two. I don't know why I did this to Bernice Johnson Reagan, who's one of the voices of the civil rights movement. I said, what should I wear? And luckily she was in a good mood. And she said, the t-shirt. You know, because I was like, do I dress up in honor of this song? She goes, no, you wear the t-shirt. Because it's a marching song. It's marching music. You're not going to march in heels. You're going to march in your t-shirt. Wear the t-shirt. And it was at Madison Square Garden. She said, you wear the t-shirt. So I really, really believe in that. But then there is that moment where you turn up the volume and you go from Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around and these really incredibly powerful songs to Stevie Wonder, you know? And he needs a good engineer. He needs a good producer. He needs a nice studio. I was in a studio once. These days are over, but it was up at a, mansion that this gazillionaire guy had bought. It was beautiful. And he'd taken one room and blown out the wall and done this cantilevered glass cube that you'd stand in and look out the window overlooking, the Catskill watershed. Because that's what you do. I just imagine he looked like, Austin Powers, because he had a little Aston Martin, But so at some point you don't say, hey Beatles, look, it's all about the touring. First of all, they stopped touring at a certain point. And come on, guys, you don't need that guy, George Martin. Just be scrappy. Who can learn? Come on, Ringo, learn how to do the equipment yourself. Yeah. And could you get some selfies? That's, at some point, this is what I really benefited from in the 90s. You don't just say, hey, do it all yourself. Come on, do it all yourself. It's about the love. Get resilient. Get scrappy. Do it. I respect the shade forest of the diversity of the recording studio and the recording process and making beautiful products of music. I worked with 7 producers on this record, some of them good friends, some of them, people I'd worked with before, some people I never. The difference in the way people could handle their equipment was stunning to me. And the speed with which some people could do their Pro Tools and not even, know not to say anything, just they heard my voice croak and they just pressed the button and I just recorded again without any discussion, so we were still in the vibe and it was all good. I just love those engineers. And then there were producers who said, you just need more here, you need more there, and I said, I would not have figured that out myself. And there were beautiful studios that I played in that were built not recently. and there were apprentices and people, 5 years ago when I was recording, there were apprentices and people learning how to do it. And they were salaried, they weren't interns, they were being paid for their work. And then they were moving up into the next position of engineer and producer. I respect that variegated world, and I love the variegated world of studio musicians and road musicians. So I believe in not just sustainability, but a thriving, diverse, and sustainable model where, because my record sales were what allowed me to go to the studio or for the record company to give me an advance to go to the studio to record. And so I respect that. The other thing I respect as a traveler, and I don't know if you've seen this, is that a lot of musicians are really weird. And the weirder they are, the worse they are at social media and recording themselves and just even knowing how to find breakfast, And so I want them in the world too, because those people show a different way of thinking and living to, that part of ourselves, or to our weird children, our teenagers that we can't communicate with. I want Ray Wiley Hubbard to come in and sing Snake Farm. It just sounds nasty, Snake Farm. Sounds like it is. Snake Farm. It's a reptile farm. Snake Farm. Ugh. That's the chorus. And I want him with his cobalt glasses. And I want him with his, little Texas cowboy pointed boots made of whatever. Possum. To show up. and blow people's minds. And I don't want to ask him to be good at all these things. And I don't want to ask Vic Chestnut to be able to be more scrappy and get around in his car, you know, when he's having a hard time getting around. You know, I don't want to ask my friends who are bipolar to, you know, get back up on their horse and get going. I want them to be off the road when they need to be on the road. When they feel stable, I want them to get on the road when they want to be on the road and be the poets that we love and value. So I am an advocate for funding the sustainable model, better distribution, agitating for it, not putting my album on Spotify. We're putting one song on Spotify to advertise the fact that my album's coming out, which puts the horse in, thank you, on the horse, in front of the cart, instead of the cart in front of the horse, because the cart is pretending that, you know, we're watching people touring with a few less musicians. They're taking the van instead of the tour bus. Some of that's fine, some of that's healthy, some of that's cutting off the fat. But a lot of us in this room know that they're going from the van to the car, or going from the van to not touring at all. Getting a job that's sapping our energy, you know, and not being able to make it work. You know, Mr. Lawn Chair is yelling at us, but we're exhausted. I like the idea of a guy coming home from work, or a gal coming home from work, and saying to her kids, hey, I just recorded the coolest thing today, check this out. Instead of, mommy has her job so that she has the luxury of going for 5 hours to produce people's albums for free and never seeing you. I like the idea of people having jobs as producers and engineers and weird songwriter. I mean, you know, John Prine has a song called Space Monkey. Space Monkey, Space Monkey, you know what I mean? And we need those songs, you know. And my whole, you know, my life changed when I was listening to John Gorgon's video. And he sang the song Gravyland. And it was saying, I wasn't asking for a lot to begin with. So the rest just felt like gravy. And I said, that's what I want. I want to not want very much. I want a sustainable career. I want to work till I die. And then the rest will feel like gravy, I promise. I want to be like John Gorka. And then I felt confident enough to go out, and that's what I did. So, you know, I like all of these things a lot, which, you know, so this is to say, and I've thought about this a long time, so I hope this doesn't sound too wedged together, but I think this is where the participatory music and the industry questions, the industry sustainability come together, because I really feel like we need each other right now very much. And because we don't have a sustainable model, this is a time to not, I would encourage people to live together, to buy a ramshackle house and live together, and have a printing press in the basement. I mean, to just get collective now, even though I think that ultimately we need to require and create better models. Right now is a time to live together, work together, drink coffee together, talk together, share resources, find things to do together, build structures, instead of sitting around going, yeah, because we love each other, and we love music, and love, love, love. That just leads to fighting. Love leads to fighting. But open mics can be very effective. Song circles can be effective. Hanging out and just doing these things can be very effective. Something that's very effective is this music coalition. And people were asking me last night if I had experience of other states doing it. And the answer is no, especially across genres like this, across the spectrum of different kinds of music. So one thing to do is to get yourself in the loop of both giving and taking, to really find your role in this coalition as someone who has something to give, because that'll help you feel better. And as something, and as a resource pool that you can go to, and a confidence pool, because working together is fun, and it can give you happiness and strength and vision, just like a social movement. So I would say work together right now, but maybe under any other name. Have coffee together, sit together, think tank together, acknowledge to one another that it is not sustainable or very cool, and that the lawn chair blog guy is not helping a bit right now, and find ways to keep the music stronger. make the music stronger. What will happen, my feeling, is that people are going to start paying attention to some of that pulsation of that movement that's happening up here in the Twin Cities, and they're going to say, what are you doing here? And you'll be able to model for the world and say, well, the reason a lot of really great touring artists are coming out of here is that we have each other. And this is the ways we are here for each other. We don't live in a commune, we live in a big, well, I guess I'm encouraging. What I encourage the students to do, I said, okay, this is what you should do. And they did not take notes. I don't think they did. But I was like, everybody's buying electric pianos, and there's these articles about upright pianos. You buy an upright piano, they're being thrown out. Get upright pianos and put them in off-campus housing. You're going to have to get them tuned. So grow basil in May before you leave. It will just grow. And then harvest it in September and make a lot of pesto. And then have a pesto fundraiser to pay for the piano tuner. And go to Ilibris, or whatever, or how you pronounce it, Ilibris, and get a whole bunch of old Beatles songbooks and sing Beatles songs every week. Just sing them, don't ask, it's a canon. And I know it's white guys, but just do that. Or you can make anybody, you can do, but make it singable. I don't know if they're, figure out, fifth dimension. Just figure out what's singable and harmonizable. And just make music side by side. As I said, I don't think they did that. But I think people should do that. I think we should get upright pianos into a lot of spaces and just see who plays. And I think that in Minnesota, that collective thing, in New York, when I hear collective, collective action, collective, social actions, I think a little bit about wife swapping. But when I think about social actions in Minnesota, I think about grain silos and things like that. There's a tradition of effective collectives in this, and I feel like this music collective is something that actually can make, this coalition is something that might be a little bigger than you think. My therapist once said, I think you're a little worse off than you think. And it was just like, I think that you've got something going on here that's a little bigger and better than you realize. So I hope that you continue to find that, to let it grow into even more of a homology, and see where it goes, because we really need that. We need that model right now. And then if the homology gets even bigger, you can take to the streets and say, and by the way, we are going to inform the next model of sustainable music business. So I have to say, I was talking to David Tamulevich once upon a time when we were first starting out, and I said, there's so much mockery. There was all this like, who's this Ani DeFranco? And they were just ripping her to shreds because they were so freaked out that somebody could be so popular without going through the industry machine. And and who is John Gorka, and who is Patty Larkin? What is this thing that's happening? They would make fun of us, and it was all that kind of sense that we were, I felt like we were painted in a way, but we were fine in our subculture. We had our sex symbols, we had our idols, we had our aspirations, we had incredible poetry. And I said to David, we're having more fun. And that drives him crazy. We're really having a lot of fun. And he said, yeah, we are having a lot of fun. And that's all we need. And it really was. There was a lot of durability, and when the music business collapsed, we had each other. And we have a lot of durability still from that. So that's where I believe participatory music leads to something more durable as well. And that's all I'll say, and then I'll take some questions.
Hi. One of the last things you said here was when the music business collapsed. I've been looking through all kinds of things to determine, was there a specific date, or was it over a period of 40 years, or when did the music business collapse specifically? Can you say?
No. I would say there was. It was a digital phenomenon,
right.
And I think that there was a digital realm that nobody saw coming and therefore didn't know to create the standards that would. I think iTunes really helped. I think some people built certain structures to keep our standards at a place where musicians were being compensated. And I think there was some ethos that we tried to build up, but not a lot. You know, there was this whole joke that there are all these kids who say, "What, you pay for music? Ha ha ha." It's like, well, yeah, because then musicians don't kill themselves. How about that? So, you know, ha ha ha. But you know, that moment in 2005 when I walked into Starbucks, somebody said, "That's going to affect you, Dar." And I said, "No, it won't." Because I'm swimming in the ocean of all the love of folk music and support, we're all going to support each other. He said, "No, because they're going to buy that Dylan album or that Eagles album. They're going to go hear the Eagles for $300. They're going to pay $100 for parking. They're going to pay $100 for a babysitter. And that's it. You know, they're out. They're not going to go to your $30 concert or your $20 concert." And, you know, that they're kind of, they're going to be told to think big. They'll think big, they'll blow it out, and so that affected a lot of things as well. As I said, that beautiful shade tree structure, those 20 boys who went out with their annoying little ponytails and they're, you know, complaining about the hotel bathroom not having a phone in it, you know, all those spoiled little boys who worked for record companies, they disappeared. And suddenly I didn't resent them so much because they would go out and find new bands and say, "New is good, try it, try it, try it." You know, suddenly I didn't resent that so much. So the digital thing, I think, and the lack of our awareness of how to protect around it. I was part of it. I was like, record companies are so corrupt. You know, I was wrong. And I think that was the moment, early 2000s.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
How good is streaming music getting on?
My fantasy would be that ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC would somehow come together, just as ASCAP was formed originally to protect the rights. That's why you get 7 cents per song. That they would come together and become the horse in front of the cart and say, "Artist first." And my fantasy would also include more cheerleading and feel the love around the music. So, because it's not just so the streaming would have better distribution, would have transparent distribution. Because the other thing I don't like about Spotify is the lack of transparency. They say that they played, you know, one of my songs that no one ever asks for or ever requests that's on my second album. Even I don't remember writing it, you know. So transparency, that would have transparency, that would have clear distribution, or they would go from the ASCAP model, which is like the test patch, just, you know, they could do it however they wanted, but with digital, there's no way, you couldn't, there's every way you could track exactly what's being played. So, more expensive, done out of conscience. I spend $21 a month instead of $7 a month. You know, everything, you know, so distribution towards estates. I don't want Sly and Family Stone living under a bridge. I like the idea of him getting money for the songs that still inspire us. So that, but also, like, I was in LA and I was at the museum and there was something playing overhead and I thought it was Edie Brickell and I thought, oh, how cool, that's her song, good for her, you know. So I talked to this Sylphie girl behind the cash register and I said, "Do you know who this is?" And she goes, "No, I don't." And I said, "Could you find out?" And she goes, "Okay." And she gets off her thing and she goes to the back room. She goes, "Song ended. I don't know what it is." And I just thought, and she said, "It's Pandora. It's called Chillaxation." And I just, like, everything about that moment was so upsetting to me. And I just thought, where is my girl at the cafe with the hairy armpits and the Ani DeFranco CD? And she, like, plays the music, and she plays it too loud, and she's singing along, and she puts the CD in, and she's like, "That's Ani DeFranco." You know, like, where's that? So, you know, I would love to see a streaming entity that also celebrates the album, the session players, the producer. You know, Brad Wood I worked with, and he's just a great producer. And he's scrapping, you know, right now, and he's trying to be part, you know, like his name should be there. His production is beautiful. So I would go two-pronged. One is in distribution, transparency, people saying, I will pay more because I get what this is about, and I want weird people making music and not having to take 6 selfies a day. The other is celebrating, the musicians and musician culture around it. That's what I would do, and that's what I really, really wish somebody would do. There are people who they say are going to do it, and I can see them missing the boat one after another. It would take someone like us, a little bit more from the trenches. Jimmy Iovine, I don't know if he's going to get it, which is too bad.
So how do you feel about Keynote?
I don't know. I just don't know. I'm crossing my fingers because is that Jimmy Iovine's thing, or is that the thing that Jay-Z's starting at?
Yeah, yeah.
What, which one?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I've been in the studio. I've been writing my snake farm. I'm not paying attention to the industry. I don't, this is, okay, I'm just going to, since I'm not teaching a course and you're not 18 years old, I'm just going to say, tell me about it a little bit more right now.
All I know is that it's a $300 purchase for a device that translates the music, the quality of what comes out of the studio, so
Right.
that people can experience the
Right.
quality level versus just what they get.
Oh, that's that. Okay, but he's not involved with a streaming entity.
I don't know that part of it.
No. Oh, how do I feel about that? Oh, I think it's great and he'll make a lot of money. Which is great. It's great to have a side gig when you're a musician these days. So I'm really happy for Neil Young. I saw him talking about that. Yes, that's hilarious. I thought I'd heard that he'd actually taken on some other, more sort of.
Well, I think that I don't know, so I can speak about all I know, so I said.
No, maybe. No, I think that's a thing. And it's definitely, and it does lead, okay, so it's that second prong of sort of respect for the music itself and not getting so into the disposability, that girl slipping off her chair and going, it's called, so he's definitely, this woman, I was, trying on clothes and a thing, and she's listening to Sam Smith, and I say, it's to Sam Smith, and she said, yeah, I love him. I mean, this is, Spotify. She's not going to feel as invested in him. She's not going to go to a Sam Smith concert. She's not going to love it. She's going to shave her armpits. So yes, for investment in sound and for the experience of sound, I think that there is, I get where he's going. And if you saw Peter Yarrow, so that's a good question. You're right, it's related. If you saw Peter Yarrow, the way he talks, the way he goes, yeah, over there, she gets it. Like he saw who got it, he felt the room. That's healthy. Those people from the 60s have a lot to teach us right now.
It seems like the point about Neil Young is bringing up the idea or is drawing attention to what Neil Young's inspiration is that compressed audio sounds very low in quality, and he's trying to draw attention to how good music can sound anymore. It's like you're not even doing anything in quality, and it kind of goes hand in hand with what you don't like on Spotify.
No.
The question is drawing attention to the issue.
Who's talking? Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, exactly. And so you're right. And I just suddenly realized what you're hooking into. I was thinking streaming, but yes, he's being kind of like chakra-ish about it. It's your ears and your brain and your sound quality, but there's also this kind of like, who are you going to be if you're blocking out so many frequencies? I feel like that's a part of what he's doing too. Do you agree with that as well?
Sure, that can be part of it. But I think what's at stake, and the point I'm bringing up, is that we're frustrated by, or it seems like there's frustration being voiced about how musicians are being recognized, their music is being recognized, and yet it's being packaged in such a way that people don't care about quality anymore. That goes with the distribution.
You're right.
It's
No.
not even being packaged.
Yeah, not even being packaged. Exactly. No, and that's also kind of where the homology comes in as well. It's sort of having that in your, like, the depth and breadth of my sonic experience counts to me as a cultural statement that, that he's trying to make us, allow us to participate in. So I totally agree, and I do think it could trickle up to also saying, and by the way, we also respect the whole element, now that I can hear this, now that this device has helped me hear all these frequencies, I'm noticing that albums that are made in this kind of studio with this kind of microphone. How many of you have ever worked with a Neumann mic before? How many of you have dealt with an engineer, like not letting you touch the Neumann mic? Like, okay, just stand right there, okay. You're like, I can just, no, you can't adjust it. It's like the Neumann mic. So maybe at some point somebody will say, that Neumann mic really does translate into my listening experience. I want more Neumann mic. And it's like, you're not going to get a Neumann mic from the attitude of like, hey, Scrappy, go make something in your basement. So, yeah, I absolutely think it's related. And I think, therefore, it is a very good question. Yeah.
I just want to say two things. First is just to let you know in Minneapolis, my friends, songwriters, and I are starting a music cooperative. And I kind of just want to announce it too because we're using our one name and performing under one name, but fronting it with all the different songwriters, so we can hopefully grow some name recognition together and selling each other's music and things like that. And a lot of us live in a international community, so what you're talking about really resonated.
You did it.
Thank you.
You did it. I knew you did it. I knew you'd done it.
Yeah, we have chickens and.
That's great, because I was going to say, you might have to, that's the other thing, if you all live together, you have to either learn how to fix stuff or learn how to sleep with people who know how to fix stuff. They're both hard, both have their downside. But if you already kind of got the chickens down, that is, I have to say, that's great. And the other thing I would encourage people to do is, sing songs that you like by your friends at your concerts. Covers, look at you like that. I mean, that's really, because that also creates not just the exposure, but the kind of the sexiness. I mean, maybe that's kind of what homology ultimately is, that sense of people being like, I want to be with that group of people. They're having a lot of fun together, and they're making music, and each one brings different things out, and like, what's that? I want to know more about it. I want in. So that's terrific, and having each other open for each other and split sets and stuff, like, split bills and things. It's terrific.
And I just have a question. I'm releasing my first album this summer, and I just wonder where I want to distribute it online. I don't want to sell out like you're talking about on Spotify, but I'm new and I don't have a larger audience to be able to reach other people. So where would you suggest doing that online?
Gosh, that's a really good question, because I think it has been pointed out to me that one thing Spotify can do is publicize, can introduce the world to you. So maybe I shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all philosophy about them. I don't know enough to know. I mean, at this point, I just feel like so much I don't like the fact that they pretend to cry real salty tears about us and say, but we came to save the music industry, because I don't believe they did. So I have a sort of a philosophical about them. So it's kind of like, yeah, you're going to get a cheaper broom at that big box store, but don't you want to support the, there's kind of some of that for me, but I might need to have the luxury of saying that, that is something, that's a good question for your cooperative. And I, at this point, am not going to be participating in a conversation of condemning a person for any choice they make and calling it selling out. I don't know, there are bands who get on the road and I hear their songs in car commercials and I'm like, well, that's how they tour, because they got a placement. And that used to be like, but what bugs me is when bands write songs with nonverbal choruses just so that they can be in car commercials. And I heard Subaru commercial by somebody I know, and I think he put in a line so it could be in the Subaru commercial, pretending that it was about something meaningful. But it is up to you, if there's something going on, you'll know about it before I do, in terms of getting it out. But I don't really feel like participating in a judgment anymore of selling out versus not selling out. However you get your music out there is great. They exploit, so I would get it out as soon as possible, in my opinion. I have a strong feeling, obviously.
Are you aware of any musician-led effort to try and get some of the money that is collecting up in the stratosphere of these companies like Apple or Verizon or AT&T, who are gathering huge amounts of money for people paying for bandwidth, essentially, to get the content that musicians create? Are you aware of any effort that's led by musicians or people who are alive with musicians to try and get some of that money to stream back towards the Harry Fox agency or some distribution arm that could kind of funnel some of that money towards musicians?
Yeah, there is, I think it's called Sound Exchange. What is Jonathan's husband? What is that called? Sound Exchange, do you know? Pat? Jonathan Brooke is married to someone, and it's great because he's a manager, so he's not a musician. They kind of have this, and I talked to Brad, who's a producer, and he said, and I was with Milk Carton Kids. The Milk Carton Kids were doing this whole, like, it's the new normal. We just have to get used to the new normal kind of thing. And Brad said, no, I'm angry, and I'm going to stay angry. And Brad and I talked about it, and I said, well, there is this, and I was kind of speaking the language of the new normal. And so I put him in touch with Pat. Sound Exchange, I believe is what it's called. And they are sort of a group of people who are really trying to understand where the money's going. And then agitate, create the policy language, get into Congress, and create the language for fairer distribution and more transparency so that we can get the money. But right now, I believe they're in the fact-finding, thing. I think they're just trying to find out what's going on and who's got the money, and speaking persuasively to people to help them understand that there's a problem right now. And I spoke to Jonathan after talking to Brad and saying, well, do we have advocates in the music world? And she said, well, no, musicians haven't stepped forward to be speakers on this. And I said, I'll be a speaker on this. And she said, we'll give you a call. So I'm waiting to be, I would like to be part of the face of artists. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I'm doing a lot of teaching. I'm doing a lot of, I'm in a position where I know a lot, and would like to use some of that, experience to back myself up, to back up the statistics that are coming in from Pat. But I would look into it because I think they need more musicians of all stripes to say.
Dressed in rags.
Pardon me?
Dressed in rags.
Dressed in rags?
It's like,
Yeah.
big cups and.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you something. It's harder to get involved with political stuff when, in my case, 40% of my, my income went out the door, when everything hit the fan. So it was like, okay, now I have to do X more gigs. Oh, at a time when my kids are growing up and they really need me more at home. So I have to decide what to do. And the good news is that I found, I love being a Wesleyan. I love these things. I love my new life. But I used to do more fundraisers. I used to get more involved. I used to speak up more and get myself in there more. I used to take less time getting done up. I mean, the whole 9 yards. I just could jump and go. And it's harder, when you're doing a music job and a non-music job, or a music job and the job that uses your music skills, but it's different from just that one thing that you did. So a lot of our friends are kind of stressed out and busy right now, but I hope that they will speak up. The first thing is to say to them, it's not sustainable. I'm glad it's working for you, Milk Carton Kids, because it is, but it's not sustainable, even for you. How do we create sustainability for our friends and for our audiences, right? Yeah.
I'm in the larger canopy of a non-musician. You can hear it just right up here that you were showing up today.
Hello.
So I just feel thrilled. And as a non-musician,
Yeah. So I'm appreciative of the connection that you're making, and I think that there are other industries, and and this is probably where Neil Young would come forward and say, that pronouns is something that allows us to, that we're just cutting out colors of the spectrum, frequencies of experience, that there's this metaphoric thing that he wants us to grab onto too. And these people from the 60s, what happened was they had a social movement, and it worked, and one of my students, her father was at Woodstock, and she said he was heartbroken. He felt like the 60s movements didn't work, and I was like, why? I mean, we got so much out of it, all these bean dishes, and and she said, because he thought after 1970 we wouldn't have money. I was like, all right, it failed, but these people were part of, like, after college, we didn't have recycling in my town, and I called the town clerk, and I said, where can you recycle? She goes, well, there's a scrap yard in White Plains, like that. And I was like, no. Back in the day, we used to bake our own bread, we recycled, and that was here in this town. She said, well, truth is, they're compiling a survey about it. So I went and met with these really lovely square folks, these grown-ups, and I helped them with the survey, and I tabulated the survey, and it was August. 30% of the town responded. When everybody was on vacation, 30% responded. And they all wanted recycling. And so they got recycling. And now it's the law. And now the recycling center is like the social center of Chappaqua, which is a very wealthy town where my parents still live and pretend it's not. Very funny, but my mom's like, I saw so-and-so there at the dump, and she pulls all this stuff out of the take it or leave it for us, and then she's like, got off the pan. I was like, oh, was that for the take it or leave it? She's like, no, I just got it right out of the dumpster. It was fine. And so it's like this whole thing where this clerk was like, So now I've been part of a movement, and I went through the pieces of the movement, and it was just recycling in my parents' town, but I know what that feels like. When somebody makes fun of you, and then you go through and you find your peeps, and you do your thing, and we didn't have to sing or march, but I still understood the solidarity that we had when we were putting things together, and then finding out that the people were with us, and then finding out, and I have that, like in my music, I have that, it's like I have this faith that you stay the course, and that it requires friendship, and community, and all of the Christian, agape, and, communitas. And so I think there is a thing, and that's why I actually, when I come to the Twin Cities and I see the music coalition happening, and I see that the cooperative's already in place, it's like, you have to understand this is a precious commodity, because you have each other, and you can start to build back some of that faith and community that Gwen's Health Pro tried to break apart when they started sleeping with our girlfriends and boyfriends. They literally tried to destabilize the social fabric because they saw the threat. We must know that there's an incredible strength by just communing. So you're right. And I have faith that you will find it. I think something's happening, will happen. I think this conversation's happening. Oh, Ellen. Okay, Ellen.
Well, I was going to say, maybe one more, but I just want to let people know, too, if they were interested in signing up for our mentoring session, the sign-ups are now happening in room 70. We're going to have a workshop with Dar and Jeff Lorca happening at 1, and I also want to give people a chance to stretch their legs. So if there's one more question.
Yeah, I'm not a musician, but my wife and I are really devoted music fans, and we go to a lot of shows, and a lot of our favorite artists we worry about a lot because we know they're struggling to make it, and we worry that they won't be touring in the future because they can't make a living at it. And so we want to support them any way we can. If they come to town, we go to their shows. If they're not coming to our town, we buy their music. Now my question is, it sounds like a little thing, but we go to the Homestead Picking Parlor and buy their CD, but sometimes we're just not going to get over there, and if we're buying something on Amazon or CD Baby, we have no idea how much of a difference does it make in what the artist gets if we buy their CD at their show or at a local record store or at Amazon or CD Baby. Is it a big difference? Is it a small difference? I have no idea.
There can be, certainly at a show.
Okay.
But yes, so that makes it, so definitely, okay, so show, store where somebody's commissions their stuff, you can sign their stuff, iTunes, CD Baby is probably better than Amazon, I don't know for sure, a lot better, okay. So that, there's some gradations there, and I don't know so well, but that's, yeah, so that's my guess, that's, oh, wait, Amazon.
Spotify.
And then Spotify. Oh, Spotify is there. So I would say, in my opinion, I mean, easy for me to say, but supporting their music by buying their music, supporting their music by showing up at shows, are equal in terms of, that's really important. Your philosophy of supporting musicians and worrying about them and caring about them and caring about the larger structure is even higher. I mean, I just think that's great. And the question is, how do we create the ethos? How do you spread that ethos of support that you feel? I meet people like you at concerts all the time, and they say things like, well, that's not much. It's a lot. It's a lot to me spiritually, and it's a lot to my career that people are showing up to your live music and keeping that ethos of going out to your live music alive in themselves and going out and keeping themselves alive by going to live music instead of just watching a blockbuster. So, you know, thank you. It really, really counts. Who you are and how you support it is right up there with caring about the gradations of how people get compensated. So thank you.
And let's give another hand for Joel.
And I want to thank the History Theater and the McNally Smith for having us, and Mike Pengrove for being here. And again, we'll have a workshop at 1 in room 70, so it's just down the steps and through that hall. There's signs directing you where Dar Williams and John Gork will be. We'll also have a songwriting workshop later this afternoon with Chastity Brown. We're going to have a radio panel, opportunities to sign up for one-on-one mentoring sessions, so I hope you'll stick around. And tonight, again, if you want to support our local live musicians, the way Dar was just talking about, we'll have a show at Amsterdam with Chastity Brown, Fathom Lane, and the Counterfactuals, which will be great. And yes, again, thank you for coming, and hopefully we'll see you throughout the weekend.
Wake up